Across millions of miles of highway that stretch across the United States, there are places where people vanish without a trace. Women with red hair, murdered, left by the side of the road, and 40 years later, we still don't know who did it. Hello, and welcome back to Dark Crimes Real. America is a country built on movement. 4 million miles of highway connect nearly every town and city in the nation. Each day, millions of drivers cross these roads, truckers, travelers, and strangers passing through. But behind the freedom of these highways lies a darker reality, one that law enforcement didn't fully see until decades later. Since the 1970s, bodies have been found along interstate corridors, victims dumped near exits, rest areas, and rural truck stops. Most were women, many were never identified. The cases stretched across states, handled by different departments, recorded under different names. For years, no one connected them. These roads allow killers to disappear within thousands of miles of movement. No witnesses, no cameras, no borders. A predator could strike in one state and vanish in another before sunrise. In 2004, the FBI created a special program called the Highway Serial Killings Initiative. Its goal was to link murders that followed America's highways and to identify killers who used those roads to move and to disappear. When analysts began comparing thousands of unsolved cases, the pattern that emerged was chilling. Over 700 possible victims, more than 500 suspects, nearly every state marked by death along its interstates. Most of the suspects were long-haul truck drivers, men who lived on the road, who knew where to hide and where no one would look. They moved faster than the reports, crossing borders before the bodies were even found. The FBI's database began to resemble a map of the nation, glowing red points tracing the paths of killers who might never be caught. And within that map, one cluster stood out in the American South, a series of women, all with red or auburn hair, murdered and left beside the road. It was one of the first patterns ever documented by the Bureau's new program. It began here, in Tennessee, with what would become known as the Redhead Murders. In the winter of 1983, a truck driver traveling east on Interstate 40 near Knoxville, Tennessee, noticed what looked like a mannequin lying by the road. When officers arrived, they found the body of a young woman. She had reddish-brown hair, no identification, and no clear cause of death. Police ruled out robbery. Her clothes were intact, and there were no signs of struggle nearby. At first, investigators assumed it was an isolated crime, a random killing along the interstate. But in the months that followed, the same scene began to repeat. In February 1984, another woman with light red hair was discovered near an exit ramp off Interstate 75 in Campbell County. She had been strangled and left under a thin layer of brush. The case file listed her only as an unidentified female, estimated age 25. No witnesses, no missing person report matched her description. Weeks later, in West Memphis, Arkansas, another body surfaced, again beside Interstate 40. Then, across state lines, in Wetzel County, West Virginia, another woman was found along a rural highway, killed in the same way. By the end of 1984, at least 6 victims had been confirmed in Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, and West Virginia. Each had similar traits: women between their late teens and mid-30s, red or auburn hair, strangled, and discarded beside major interstates. Local law enforcement handled each case independently. Tennessee investigators didn't know about the Arkansas body, West Virginia police never heard about the ones in Kentucky. Every jurisdiction worked alone. The women had no ID, and most carried nothing that could link them to a home or a name. Some bodies were found weeks after death, exposed to rain, animals, and cold. Decomposition erased fingerprints. Dental records were useless without someone to compare them to. Truckers were often the ones who discovered them. Men who pulled over for rest saw something unusual on the roadside and called it in. One described it as a flash of color in the grass, the kind of sight you never forget. By early 1985, journalists began connecting the reports. Local news anchors mentioned a possible pattern of murders involving red-headed women found near Tennessee highways. Within months, the phrase, "the Redhead Murders," appeared in print. The name stuck. It was simple, haunting, and true. But behind the headlines, investigators still had no leads. No one had seen the killer. No one could explain how he moved so freely across state lines. The murders had turned from coincidence into a pattern, and from a pattern into a mystery that was spreading fast. By 1985, the pattern of red-haired victims had become impossible to ignore. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation began coordinating with police in neighboring states, comparing notes from cases that shared the same details: young women, red or auburn hair, strangulation, and highways. Each jurisdiction had its own files, its own procedures, and until now, no reason to share information. Detectives from Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas met for the first time that spring. They spread photographs and autopsy reports across a conference table, searching for a common thread. The similarities were undeniable. Different counties, different years, but the same kind of murder. The meetings led to more questions than answers. Was it one killer traveling between states, or several men following the same pattern? Investigators had no centralized database to check against. Every connection had to be made by hand: paper files, phone calls, letters sent through the mail. The process was slow, and the murders weren't stopping. Then came a break, not from new evidence, but from a survivor. In April 1985, a 26-year-old woman from Knoxville accepted a ride from a man driving a brown pickup truck. He offered to take her to another town, but instead pulled off the road and tried to strangle her. She fought back and escaped, running barefoot to the highway for help. The attacker was identified as Jerry Leon Johns, a 32-year-old truck driver from Cleveland, Tennessee. Police arrested him the next day and found rope, handcuffs, and women's clothing in his vehicle. He was charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. Investigators immediately noticed the resemblance to the Redhead murders. The victim had red hair. The method, strangulation, matched. The location, a Tennessee interstate, was the same. Johns fit the profile perfectly: a man who lived on the road, often traveling across state lines, sometimes for weeks at a time. Detectives questioned him repeatedly. He denied involvement in any other deaths, insisting the assault was a single act of violence. Without DNA testing or direct physical evidence, there was little the police could do. They compared tire tracks, fibers, and even knots in the rope, but nothing definitively linked him to the earlier murders. Still, he remained their best suspect. In the years that followed, while John served his prison sentence, the TBI continued to review cold cases along Tennessee's interstates. They collected samples from crime scenes, storing them for future testing. At the time, few could imagine that it would take more than 30 years to uncover even one match. The FBI quietly noted the case within its VICAP database, one of the earliest entries that would later form part of the Highway Serial Killings Initiative, but the data was limited. Each new report added another unsolved point on the map. By the end of the decade, the investigation had stalled. John stayed behind bars, the murders stopped, and officials hoped that meant the killer was caught. But there was never proof: no confession, no trial, no closure. For the families of the missing, the silence was unbearable. For investigators, it was familiar. Another mystery lost to the miles of highway, waiting for technology or time to bring the truth back. More than 3 decades passed before technology finally began to answer the questions that detectives in the 1980s couldn't. The Redhead murders had grown cold, buried beneath newer cases, forgotten by most, except a few investigators who refused to close their files. Among them were agents from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. They kept the evidence sealed, waiting for a day when science could speak for the dead. That day came in 2018. For the first time, advanced DNA and forensic genealogy were applied to the old samples. One by one, the nameless women began to recover their identities. The first to be confirmed was Tina Marie Farmer, a 21-year-old from Indiana, found dead near Jellicoe, Tennessee in 1985. Through DNA, investigators connected her to the suspect they had always suspected, Jerry Leon Johns. He had already died in prison 3 years earlier. Not long after, another breakthrough followed. A woman buried in Greene County, Tennessee, once known only as Jane Doe No. 1, was identified as Lisa Nichols from West Virginia. Her DNA matched relatives through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. For the first time, her family knew where she had gone. Then came the identifications of Elizabeth Lamont from New Hampshire, Donna Blaungard from Pennsylvania, Vicki Banks from South Carolina, and Cheryl Ann Wick from Minnesota. They had all been found along the same network of highways, hundreds of miles from home, their cases once thought unrelated. The picture was finally becoming clear. The Redhead victims came from across the country, women on the move, traveling, working, or simply trying to start over. Each new name was a small act of justice. It didn't reveal who killed them, but it gave them back what they had lost: identity. Families who had waited decades were finally told the truth. Some had filed missing person reports in the 1980s, only to be told their daughters had probably run away. Now, with a single phone call, they learned the real story. One of the most remarkable efforts came not from federal agents, but from students. In 2018, a sociology class at Elizabethtown High School in Tennessee began studying the Redhead murders under the guidance of their teacher, Alex Campbell. The students mapped each victim's discovery site, reviewed autopsy data, and shared their findings with the TBI. Their work helped confirm the number of victims officially linked to the case, 6, and revived public attention to a mystery nearly forgotten. The Redhead murders became more than a cold case. It became an example of how persistence, technology, and public awareness could cross decades to solve what once seemed impossible. The FBI incorporated the data into its ongoing Highway Serial Pullings initiative, updating profiles and linking similar cases nationwide. By 2023, most of the women once known only as Jane Does had their names restored. The killer's identity remained unknown, but the victims were no longer invisible. Their faces, once composites drawn from memory, were now real again. The Redhead murders had started as a story of loss. Decades later, it became a story of remembrance, proof that even in silence, the truth can still be found. Nearly 4 decades after the first body was found beside Interstate 40, the Redhead murders remain unsolved. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation still lists the series as open, though few expect new evidence to surface. The case has grown quiet, a file that moves only when technology does. The only confirmed link between a suspect and a victim came in 2018 when DNA testing tied Jerry Leon Johns to the murder of Tina Marie Farmer. Johns, a truck driver, had died in prison 3 years earlier while serving time for an unrelated assault. For investigators, that result was both validation and frustration. It proved the connection they had long suspected, but offered no new answers about the remaining women. After the identification of multiple victims, the FBI and TBI compared each case again, looking for overlooked clues. The methods were similar, but not identical. Some victims had been strangled, others beaten. Distances between the recovery sites varied from 15 to hundreds of miles. The differences made it difficult to determine whether one man was responsible, or if several killers had used the same highways for the same purpose. Officials at the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative believe the latter is most likely. According to their database, more than 400 unsolved murders nationwide share similar characteristics: transient victims, highway dump sites, and no clear suspects. The Redhead Murders, they say, were among the first to reveal how large and complex the problem really was. In Tennessee, the TBI has preserved every item of physical evidence. Samples of stored, DNA profiles logged, and every few years new tests are run when technology improves. But the leads rarely change. No new names have appeared. No active suspects remain. What investigators have learned instead is procedural. The case forced coordination between agencies that had never worked together before. It became a training example for future detectives, a demonstration of how geography and communication barriers can hide a killer in plain sight. In 2021, the TBI officially recognized the case as part of the FBI's ongoing Highway Serial Killings database, ensuring that any new matches or linked offenders will trigger alerts automatically. For now, that is where the case stands: preserved, waiting, unresolved. For the families, closure remains partial. 6 victims now have names, but their stories end without justice. No single trial, no confession, no one to hold accountable. The highways that once carried their killer still stretch across the country, filled with trucks and travelers who may never know the history written into the asphalt beneath their wheels. The Redhead Murders began as a mystery of identity. Who were these women? After decades, that question was answered. What remains is the other question: who killed them? And for investigators, that is the hardest part. Some questions simply stay on the road, moving, silent, and unanswered. The highways never sleep. Even when the towns go dark and the air stands still, the roads remain alive. Constant lines of motion carrying millions of people across the country. Every mile connects lives. Every exit holds a story. And sometimes those stories never finish. The Redhead Murders showed how easily a person can vanish inside that movement. 6 women traveled the same roads as everyone else, but their journeys ended in silence. For years, they were reduced to numbers, anonymous, buried without names, their faces drawn from memory. Technology gave them back their identities, but not their justice. The man or men who took their lives remain unknown. The highways that carried them still stretch on, unchanged, passing the same towns, the same truck stops, the same empty spaces where no one watches for long. This case was the first to reveal how vast the problem could be. Killers who move as freely as their victims, using distance and time as their disguise. It forced law enforcement to see the roads differently, not just as pathways of commerce, but as corridors of crime. Today, the interstates still hum with the same low rhythm: engines, tires, wind. Beneath that noise lies history, written in names once forgotten and found again. The Redhead Murders was only the beginning. South of Tennessee, along Interstate 45, between Houston and Galveston, another cluster of victims would soon appear. A place locals came to know by a different name: the Texas Killing Fields.